All right, it is time for the Way Black History Fact, and today's Way Black History Fact comes from history.com, and we are talking about Loving versus Virginia. So for those that don't know, Loving versus Virginia was a Supreme Court case that struck down state laws banning interracial marriage in the United States. The plaintiffs in the case were Richard and Mildred Loving, a white man and a black woman whose marriage was deemed illegal according to Virginia state law. With the help of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, the Lovings appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled unanimously that so-called anti-miscegenation statutes were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. The decision is often cited as a watershed moment in the dismantling of Jim Crow race laws. So what is miscegenation? The Loving case was a challenge to centuries of American laws banning miscegenation, i.e., any marriage or interbreeding among different races. Restrictions on miscegenation existed as early as the colonial era, and of the 50 U.S. states, all but 9 states had a law against the practice at some point in their history. Early attempts to dispute race-based marriage bans in court met with little success. One of the first and most noteworthy cases was 1883's Pace versus Alabama, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that an Alabama anti-miscegenation law was unconstitutional because it punished black people and white people equally. In 1888, meanwhile, the High Court ruled that the states had the authority to regulate marriage. By the 1950s, more than half the states in the Union, including every state in the South, still had laws restricting marriage by racial classifications. In Virginia, interracial marriage was illegal under 1924's Racial Integrity Act. Wow. Those who violated the law risked anywhere from 1 to 5 years in a state penitentiary. All right, the central figures in Loving versus Virginia were Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter, a couple from the town of Central Point in Caroline County, Virginia. Richard, a white construction worker, and Mildred, a woman of mixed black and Native American ancestry, were longtime friends who fallen in love. In June of 1958, they exchanged wedding vows in Washington, D.C., where interracial marriage was legal, and then returned home to Virginia. On July 11, 1958, just 5 weeks after their wedding, the Lovings were woken in their bed at about 2 a.m. and arrested by the local sheriff. Richard and Mildred were indicted on charges of violating Virginia's anti-miscegenation law, which deemed interracial marriages a felony. When the couple pleaded guilty the following year, Judge Leon M. Bazile sentenced them to 1 year in prison, but suspended the sentence on the condition that they would leave Virginia and not return together for a period of 25 years. Following their court case, the Lovings were forced to leave Virginia and relocate to Washington, D.C. The couple lived in exile in the nation's capital for several years and raised 3 children, sons Sidney and Donald, and a daughter, Peggy, but they longed to return to their hometown. In 1963, a desperate Mildred Loving wrote a letter to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for assistance. Kennedy referred the Lovings to the ACLU, which agreed to take their case. The Lovings began their legal battle in November 1963 with the aid of Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf, 2 ACLU young lawyers. The couple filed a motion asking for Judge Bazile to vacate their conviction and set aside their sentences. When Bazile refused, Cohen and Hirschkopf took the case to the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, which upheld the original ruling. Following another appeal, the case made its way to the United States Supreme Court in 1967, and the Supreme Court announced its ruling in Loving versus Virginia on June 12, 1967. In a unanimous decision, the justices found that Virginia's interracial marriage law was in violation of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. These people are the reason why you can now marry whoever you want.